Hello, everyone. Welcome to Tuska Forum by Bleeding Metal 2026. I'm so happy to see so many faces, so many people here. This band and this session seems to be beloved, expected, right? Are we happy to see people here on stage talking to each other? Yes. Thank you very much. My name is Kiki. My pronouns are she, her. I hope you feel welcome here. This is a room for safe dialogue and communication, and I will let my colleague introduce himself and the band in the session in a second, but I also want to remind you that you will very soon see a QR code in the background with the name of the session. And you can scan that QR code to submit your questions for the band. So please enjoy the forum, check out the schedule, come back later and tomorrow and on Sunday. Tomorrow and on Sunday. And yeah, have an amazing Tuska weekend.
So, welcome everybody from me as well. I'm Jussi Alruut, your other host for the weekend at Tuska Forum. So I think it's an absolute pleasure to start with a band that I think is one of the most interesting metal bands around at the moment. And we are, of course, talking about Blood Incantation from Denver, Colorado. Please welcome. And their music combines death metal, progressive, psychedelic, ambient music, and their latest album, Absolute Elsewhere, has propelled the band to new heights of popularity, reaching beyond genre borders. For example, Metal Hammer magazine ranked it as the best metal album of 2024. I concur, it is a masterpiece. We are extremely happy to have with us today the guitarist and vocalist Paul Riedel, and drummer Isaac Falk. So, welcome back to Tuska and Finland again, gentlemen. You have said that from the very beginning of your band in 2011, you had a 10-year plan of what to do. That is an amazing approach. Could you please briefly describe to us that plan?
Sure, no problem. Um, so when Isaac and I first met in 2011, we were both playing in black metal bands that kind of flirted with folk music and doom metal. And then we started playing guitar together. And then we started a funeral doom band and a black metal band. And then at some point, after doing that for a few months, when he was playing his high school bands, Sentimani's bands, he was the drummer, and I had never heard somebody play drums like this in a band that wasn't a professional musician on a major stage or like a celebrity. Every drummer, respectfully, that I'd been in a band with up until then was very far behind Isaac's skill set 15 years ago. So we immediately stopped doing these other bands and then started working on this death metal stuff. And one of the first things that we did, because we're both conceptually motivated people, we like aesthetic and putting things in a context and a perspective, both for ourselves as artists, but also as listeners and appreciators of art. One of the first things we set out to do was what type of band is this going to be? Because it's not just riffs. It's going to have a certain aesthetic, a certain lyrical content, a certain sort of atmospheric component that is happening. And because at the time we're also tripping a lot, and we were trying to combine all these things, but we actually, at the risk of going on an even more abstract tangent, I would be very excited to tell you about after we'd recorded Interdimensional Extinction in 2013, we were working on other material. And at this time, Morris was living in Ecuador. And so it took 2.5 years for Interdimensional to actually come out. And during that time, we were working on what became our first album, The Star Spawn. And in the end of 2013, beginning 2014, we had Giza Power Plant, which is also fairly abstract middle section. But we also, I had written a song called Hidden Species, and we were jamming this, just the two of us. And this is probably the first truly psychedelic track that we made. And we practiced this a couple times in like December 2013, January 2014. And we really liked this kind of gore gutsy, stargazery, krautrocky stuff. And we even recommended, we showed this rehearsal to our friends and said, should we, while we await Interdimensional to come out, should we start a new band that's only psychedelic, like mystical, esoteric death metal, or
Yeah,
should
I
we
mean,
continue?
I remember you showing me that song and us working on Hidden Species, just the two of us, and you brought it to me as an idea for another band.
Yeah.
And that idea was percolating, but then I think I told you, why isn't this just a Blood Incantation
Yeah.
song?
And everyone that we showed it to said you should start a new band, which basically inspired us to not do that. And we said this is definitely going to be what Blood Incantation should do. And
And that was kind of the beginning of us putting all kinds of ideas into the pot that maybe wouldn't have been okay to do in that sense. You know, a lot of bands have parameters, you know, or genres that say, you know, you can't put this type of beat on this type of riff or this type of thing, right? And there was like slint riffs,
Yeah.
like kind
the
of
big
like
clean break in Hidden Species is a slint, the 90s band from America that's like down tempo. I don't know if it's post rock or what do they even call this music, but slint, Spiderland. This is this descending clean chord progression. We were like, let's put a slint riff in this song, you know. Not allowed, but I think that's probably
But yeah,
the first true
but-
true song like that.
per your question about the 10-year plan, when we first started, there were a lot of
Right.
ideas about like, okay, here's the demos, and then we knew that, you know, the first album, the first EP into the album, like we wanted to do black and white for Interdimensional,
With
red,
like a
red
red accent.
logo,
Yeah.
red accent, and then red logo for Starspawn, and then green logo for Hidden History. Hidden History is like, you know, following the Morbid Angel blueprint a little bit, but also, you know, just to talk about another psychedelic death metal band, if you want to talk about that, but
And the third
the
record was
ambient
going to be ambient.
was already an
'Cause
idea.
that would be cool.
We were talking
Absolutely.
joking about the genre of slambient for a long time,
Which is now a thing. We haven't gotten there, but the world already now does this. They weren't doing it back
But
then.
this was just a joke like 15 years ago, you know.
Yeah, it's becoming more real every day, like
Yeah.
today.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it seems to me that then Absolute Elsewhere is an album where you sort of combine all of that, what you've done before. Would this be a fair assessment?
It was a pretty long journey. I mean, Absolute Elsewhere is kind of a capstone on the first 15 years of the band in a sense that, you know, it was really also, you know, Hidden History is very technical and dense, intricate production. Starspawn is very loose. And then Time Wave kind of obliterated all of this and opened up this huge space for us to just take everything out and then focus on these very small, subtle sounds at a time. And this also opened up this creative portal for Jeff and Morris to also bring more to the table, which contributed directly both to the dynamics and, you know, the excitement in Absolute Elsewhere, but also I think now as we enter a new era, technically All Gates Open finishes this thing, which was actually the genesis of what became Absolute Elsewhere, and Time Wave, but
And All Gates Open is the soundtrack to the
All Gates
same
Open,
name
yeah,
documentary
just came out.
released
It's the soundtrack to the making of documentary by the same name about Absolute Elsewhere, and it contains music which was made during the same time period as the material from Time Wave Zero was written, and we were rehearsing it, but then we would be improvising and doing stuff on the side outside of band practice. So this was like early 2021, late 2020. And Time Wave was recorded in August. So from early 21, late 20, early 21 up until Time Wave was recorded, we were also doing all this other stuff. And that's what made the documentary, which, you know, just in case you guys are unaware, the avant-garde transcendental documentarian archival filmmaker Tam O'Dan, who made All Gates Open, is right here. He's filming with his camera as well. So if you want to give him a hand. He was the director and editor, and it was actually one of his ideas to say, do you guys have any unreleased music that we could use for the background music of this documentary, which now eventuated as the physical standalone release for All Gates Open.
But yeah, to get back to what you were saying about Absolute Elsewhere being kind of like a pool of all of our stuff, is if you look at Paul and I, and even the other guys too, Morris and Jeff, if you look at all of our past bands, you know, I look at Absolute Elsewhere as kind of a culmination of all of the projects that we've ever worked on. And the skill sets that we built upon through each release. And Absolute Elsewhere definitely is a culmination of all of that. And but obviously added to that a lot of the freedom that started with Hidden Species is kind of fully expressed on Absolute Elsewhere, where we got to, incorporate so many of these other elements that maybe we didn't think could work before, but then we were able to build the skills to do that through working on these other things.
So you have your roots in death metal. You already mentioned Morbid Angel, and we actually tried to count how many Morbid Angel T-shirts you guys are wearing in the documentary. It was more than 10, which is wonderful. You mentioned death and Gorguts, but you have also fully embraced the long history of psychedelic music, and I know
For
you
sure.
guys are avid collectors of music. Extreme metal, psychedelic music, which can be quite soft as well, on the face of it, these don't seem like two of the most likely styles to fuse together. How do you see the connection?
I mean, I see it as a very direct connection.
Yeah, I
And
would
I think
disagree.
I look back to a lot of the early psychedelic music, and especially Pink Floyd. Careful with that Axe Eugene. It has like a black metal scream basically in it. Arthur Brown with his like theatricalness. Even like stuff like Helter Skelter from the Beatles. All this stuff, and then if you're looking at even more obscure stuff, you can get into really dark and kind of scary sounding music. You can think of stuff from Kevin Ayers, or even like Tangerine Dream's Zeit is like one of the most like terrifying dark ambient records, which I think fits right along with if you're listening to Velvet Cocoon or something like this.
Also, 1968, there's this band called the CA Quintet, a record called Trip Through Hell with a THRU. And it's an album cover of like a old-timey movie landscape that is all blood red with flames and people being killed on the cover, which is pretty extreme for 1968. And if you listen to this record, it has long psychedelic dissonant passages, textural soundscape patches, also tritones, even though it's all clean guitar with like blues rock distortion.
I mean, Black Sabbath.
Black
I mean,
Sabbath,
is psychedelic,
it's psychedelic.
and metal. So I mean, it's. I think it's at the inception. These things that seem so different. On paper, I think that's a lot of times genretizing things in the press or the media. It becomes this kind of separation, right? It's like putting these things in boxes that maybe actually, if we get back to, for example, what we talk about all the time is the Mayhem Tangerine Dream connection.
Yeah, 1986, Euronymous sat out front of a former Tangerine Dream founding member Conrad Schnitzler's house and begged him to give him a tape, which ended up becoming Sylvester Anfang on Death Crush intro. So one of the most extreme, like, a schism in the world, that there's a pre and post Death Crush. This is literally extreme metal, underground DIY, murderously cult music, and krautrock physically touching the first time from the get-go. But also, I think psychedelic is, it's a verb, but I also think it's an atmospheric textural component. For instance, a band like Black Sabbath, obviously, this heavily morose atmosphere is psychedelic, because I think even like an Iron Maiden, a straightforward Iron Maiden song is maybe not psychedelic, but you're going to tell me the rhyme of the Ancient Mariner is not psychedelic. This whole middle section they're doing this, this suspension of disbelief into the atmosphere is what this escapism. Fantasy is escapism, heavy metal is fantasy. This type of mental abstraction or suspension of disbelief, this is psychedelia. This is moving your brain into a different realm of experience. And I think a very simple riff can do that, but also so can a lot of textural components. And I think heavy metal, I mean, Formula's Fatal to the Flesh is a deeply psychedelic album. This is crazy. I mean, also, these people were objectively tripping balls leading up to making this type of music.
Well, yeah, I think to that point, like psychedelic sometimes means a method more so than a sound, also because anyone who has engaged in mind-altering substances of any kind, you'll kind of understand that the approach to art just kind of automatically changes. And some people who have never done that at all have that. I mean, Robert Fripp from King Crimson, for example, has said he's never taken acid in his life, but the aesthetic and the ethos of King Crimson is deeply psychedelic.
It's mind altering.
It's mind
Its methodology results in a mind altering experience, whether or not they're.
And that's another
driven.
band. I mean, King Crimson is extremely heavy. It gets very extreme, but it has these very, esoteric, very mystical sections as well. So I think also I think to us, I think Paul and I talk about this a lot. That Blood Incantation specifically is to take you on that kind of trip and experience all of the feelings, right? And so in a any sort of experience, if it's life or a dream or a psychedelic experience, there's these peaks and valleys, and it's not all one thing. It's not all that calm. People think of it like, oh, like the really melodic, really chill parts of a Pink Floyd album. It's like, yeah, well, we love that too. But there's also these moments of life, where it's chaos and it's dark, it's terrifying. All of those things exist, I think, simultaneously in the world as well. So it's important for us as artists, but also channeling that ethos of what we see as like the 1973 to 1993 connection. That's kind of like what we talk a lot about, from prog to metal, whatever. This using music as a transporting mechanism for the listener to take on that journey.
And that's something we actually try to do even with short songs. Like, we don't set out to write long songs for simply length's sake. Sometimes you only need 4 to 5 minutes to convey a deep atmosphere or this narrative structure of a journey. But sometimes 20 minutes takes you on an even more dynamic journey, and it really allows you to invest emotionally in this narrative, cinematic structure of the music. And that's just something we like about all types of genres of music that do that. I mean, Return to the 36 Chambers is both an atmospheric and psychedelic album. The production of these beats is extremely immersive and world building. But people don't say Wu-Tang is psychedelic hip hop, but it is.
I of course agree with you that there is a connection and a profound one. One of the ways that I feel it as a listener is that extreme metal music and psychedelic music, they both have the sense of somehow breaking apart my everyday sensory experience. Is that something that you
I
find
think
as well?
that's that fantasy, that's the escapism that's present in heavy metal culture. It's preoccupation with, whether it's D&D or sci-fi or like medieval stuff or this like mystical Satanism, all of this abstraction from the day to day. I think that suspension of the disbelief is critical to both psychedelic music and extreme metal's flourishing dynamism of different subgenres and all the cultures that have developed within these different types of metal. Absolutely.
Yeah, and also I think of music oftentimes as, I've heard it described as there could be a perfume or an incense of a room, and ambient music oftentimes can be this kind of incense that you put into a situation that it will change automatically your experience with your reality. But extreme music does this really interesting thing where it can pull you immediately in and out, right? It can you can go deeply into it, you can listen to it, you can go to the show, you can have you can party, but you can also engage with it intellectually, and you can also be with it in a way that will, kind of trip parts of your brain that maybe you wouldn't go to in other times. So I think what Blood Incantation is about is like combining those things and making it a seamless experience.
Metal music, of course, has a very strong effect on you, even bodily and sensory in that sense. And psychedelic music sometimes has more of a sort of a mental effect on you. I mean, of course, it's not a clear dividing line. And sometimes I find when I listen to music, for example, like your music, when there is this sort of extreme kind of almost physical barrage on you, and then there's the kind of the smooth, more ethereal section.
We love that shit.
You feel it very differently. So
we are all about that
Yeah.
exact dynamic threshold of the experience, and as many of these peaks and valleys as we can try to incorporate into a song. The dirgiest, most funereal lows and the most cosmic ascendancies. This is what it's all about. Like, we're constantly trying to get, we joke all the time that every Blood Incantation record is actually very linear in its progression. If you arrange the songs chronologically, each one increases everything. So it's always more technical, but also more beautiful. It's more extreme, but it's also more proggy and calm. It's more aggressive and hellish, but it's also more ethereal and more subtle. And so we're always adding, pushing out in every direction, you know, like expanding as much as it can to try to incorporate all this other stuff, and like a supernova sucking up all this stuff that it's just kind of growing out of. That's where all these other weird little genres pop up, because it's like, oh yeah, I mean, we should put a dub snare there, you know?
Yeah, like in the beginning of Absolute Elsewhere.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And then sort of a David Gilmour-esque lead after
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
But why not? You know, I mean,
Yeah, why
that's
not?
you know, that's. I mean, I've also heard people say that it's the last frontier of music is just combining things. And while I do think that that's also kind of part of where Blood Incantation is at, is like, you know, combining these different disparate things. We did find, I think, early on in the band what defines Blood Incantation sound, and I think there's something in the, like, you know, we were saying this just a few minutes ago in a different interview, that yes, there's like so many things that are incorporated, but it's always obvious what part is a Blood Incantation part, and there's kind of this overarching sound that we always know what it is. It could be, you know, prog, it could be like a jazz part, or it could be like slam or something.
Yeah,
but
I also think, you know, we play in a drop tuning, which, you know, this is something you get made fun of in high school. You get beat up and thrown in a locker for playing a drop D. But I always thought it was a very cool sound because I like open strings, and we have a lot of open strings riffs. And obviously, so does a band like Gorguts, but they're doing it in standard tuning. And so we have a lot of these. Um, we call it the finish chord at practice. But if you're in a standard tuning and you do, instead of like these three, I don't know the names of the sorry, but if instead of doing these three, you only do these two, but you bar it with these two and then only have the high one. This is like what Nihilist would do. This is like what Demigod does. And so if we do this, like my other band, Spectre Voice, does this all the time. But if you do this in a standard tuning, you get a finish chord. If you do this in a drop tuning, you get this epic black metal chord where you can use these
It's a
two
minor
fingers.
ninth.
Yeah, you can make these really, really big melodic sounds where you can do the melody on top while you're holding it down. We do a lot of this, which most of the bands that were, you know, inspired by and borrowing riff ideas from, they're all playing at standard tuning. So we're actually adding two tones, or is it one? Is two frets one semitone? I don't even know. It's something.
Anyway, it sounds
Yeah,
great.
yeah. We have a lot of these types of riffs, and I think if you play the wrong note in a different tuning, it will make it sound right. If that is, I guess, what I'm trying to say.
You already mentioned openness. I find in your music and a lot of music that we could call psychedelic that there's a lot of space in it. The sound is big, and you know, Pink Floyd already had echoes. So, do you find that there's the sense of course, if you allow a little bit of guitar geekery here, using delay and
Oh yeah.
reverb and
Oh
stuff
yeah.
like that. That's like
I
the
mean,
sound.
I'm constantly trying to get out there. You know, I love guitar. We used. I think Morris actually has two delays. Actually, technically, we both. I think he has three because one of them we only use for reverse, which we don't use as like a part. You don't put a reverse delay on a solo, but you use it for these like textural things in between, like when one guitar cuts out and then the other guy introduces the riff. This is like, you know, we like these types of stuff. It makes this immersive listening thing, especially in headphones, but also with a full stack. Like this sounds, you know.
So Absolute Elsewhere, it has a structure which could be called architectural. So in that sense, it's in the vein of, for example, Roger Waters and his compositions for Pink Floyd. I imagine it took a long time for you to build that whole canvas.
Years, honestly.
Yeah, so it was a very intense experience writing the record, because I mean, it began. I also play guitar, and so I wrote a lot of the stuff for the Stargate first, and that was kind of like the jumping off point of the record. And one of the cool moments of writing it was when I had this kind of maybe it was only 15 minutes at the time, and then I brought the first part to the band, and we expanded it quite significantly to add like another 3-5 minutes. And then, you know, working on the riffs together. And I think through doing that, then Paul brought in a bunch of old riffs that he had and some ideas from actually around Hidden History. It was like even before
Even
Hidden
before,
History.
no, like the the whole last several minutes of the message, like especially the actual outro, like the final riff in the message. This is I have Dropbox videos of me playing this in 2014, um, being like, this is a cool ending riff, but it's like you can't put this riff anywhere. This isn't just an end of a song riff. This has to be end of an album, like very big climax types of riff. And Starspawn, the song on that record, had a pretty concise ending already. So you can't just frivolously put this riff in. So we had to wait until we had a architecture that would support this kind of grandiose outro riff, which was also written, what is this David Byrne thing about how the music changes depending on the types of stages you're playing. And so, like, a lot of European festival metal bands have a lot of these Eurofest metal riff parts. And it's because this translates very naturally to that environment. And when we're playing on the floor in a basement, we're playing this really dense, intricate stuff, and it's just like kind of a flurry of sound. And that gets lost on a lot of these bigger stages. So part of the architecture for Absolute Elsewhere, we were deliberately trying to streamline some of these riffs, also to allow more space in the actual waveform for other textural components, because you cannot have, mellotrons and mini moog and clean vocals and acoustic guitars and hand percussions and 6 guitar tracks and lead guitars and bass and a 20-piece drum kit.
Although we would love to.
Yeah,
do
but the
all those things
waveform
all the
gets
time.
too compressed. Everything gets smushed up. It doesn't sound right. And so I think, one of the most legitimate criticisms leveraged at Absolute Elsewhere is the death metal is less convoluted than on our previous technical death metal types of records. But this was a deliberate stylistic choice in order for us to allow more sound into this palette. Because unless they invent a bigger waveform, like, we're not going to be able to get all these ideas into one soundscape, And that was a huge part of the development of this architecture and allowing this there was so much extra sound in Absolute Elsewhere.
And then also, I'll say at the beginning of the message, that was also a riff idea that you had for a long time.
That's a Hidden History
That was a
era
Hidden History.
riff for sure.
But
There's
then-
Dropbox from that for sure.
Yeah, so like the construction of the two songs was also very different in that the Stargate had very distinct kind of part one and then middle section that was going to, would then be Torsten from Tangerine Dream into the final part. Whereas the message really was, we kind of thought of it as different parts, but it was very much like a 20-minute piece of music.
It's more linear.
Yeah.
Because like part one, like these are like basically all of these riffs are going in a row. And the first real stylistic break is Morris's riff, actually, the 80s King Crimson, like the
Just tablet 2 or whatever.
This was a very clear stylistic break. But all these other riffs kind of leading up to that, I was kind of just like, I don't know where it can stop. It has to stop at some point. And then luckily when Morris brought this riff into, which is also a new thing for Morris, like he typically will focus on, these incredible guitar solos. And he brought this very different riff to practice, which then the speed metal riff that starts part 3 in the message, we knew that was at some point we had to get from here to there. And then he brings this really different riff, which we jam on, and we have a very cool, different attitude about. And then it actually just completely changed into that whole 60s psychedelic part, into the Eloy part, this Pink Floyd riff. All of this came out of this.
Which ended up being actually a very band, like, jamming oriented part of the, so like, just to, break it down, it's basically separated into 2 parts where either Paul or I will bring like a skeleton of a song and like with a bunch of complicated riffs. And then as a band with all 4 of us in the room, we'll just jam these parts like in, just at our rehearsal space and just play. And then those ideas will percolate and then expand whatever that.
I think actually for after that, kind of once the 80s King Crimson part went distorted, and we're kind of like, where do we go from here? What does this happen? I think we were inadvertently jamming on some other type of like objectively Eloy worshipping part for a different idea, not even in this particular song. And when we played that big open Pink Floyd minor riff, we were like, we should just do that. It should just go straight into that.
And then I took the I took the click track and I just made a straight line go up, and I was like, oh, let's just speed it up, and then we'll just
Speed it up.
Yeah,
Because we
It
knew
worked.
it just had to get to this 80s speed metal part. But all of that part from the 80s King Crimson part to that, this is like 4 or 5 minutes, in start message part two, that was purely collaborative, just free energy, where we were like, this is so ridiculous. How could we do this? And then it really did feel. And I actually remember once we actually finally got to that part, the vocal part. I remember telling the guys at practice like the melody and everything was like already right there. It was so obvious. It was like, I think this part has to have, we didn't set out to have any clean. I mean, except for this like superation part in the Stargate, we were like, we should have this clean vocal part because we like superation, the Cube, 1993. But this Eloy section, I was like, I think we have to do this. Like, and we had never really previously discussed what's going to happen if we incorporate clean vocals into this music. It was never, wasn't intending to happen that way. But it very loudly was like, it has to be like this. You have to go all the way. And then because of this section, then we get this really crazy Fender Rhodes acoustic, like truly pastoral 60s. Like that's like the most psychedelic part of the album probably. And then the Tangerine Dream part, that is insane. But those guys are pros.
They are wonderful additions to your expertise on the album, and the final riff, the final melody is wonderful, sublime, and we're going to hear the whole album tonight. Correct? Finishing
Whole
with
album.
that.
That is
One
true.
more question before we move. One more question before we move into the audience questions, which I have 17 of here. We probably won't have time to go through all of them. It's quite clear that the worldview behind the lyrics of Absolute Elsewhere and other of your albums is not the mainstream materialistic worldview. Briefly, we got a few minutes. Describe it.
Yeah. I mean, so I write all of the lyrics, but only 3 or 4 of these songs did I ever write lyrics first. And these were Hidden Species, The Giza Power Plant, and The Message. Every other lyric, I just, in the practice space, we play it this many times. There's supposed to be this transition to this part. And so I'll just make the shape of the vocal fit the riff. And because we have a pretty specific yet wide-based lyrical concept to fit into the aesthetic, it's very easy to be like, okay, Portal, something other stuff, this type of stuff. But I never really took the time to write until the Stargate, which, like Isaac said, it had this very deliberate narrative structure, very clear, part one, part two, part three. So when we were combining these, I had to, for the first time, write lyrics with each specific part in mind while maintaining a narrative structure from the first lyric to the last lyric. This is the first time I ever did this in any band. But the lyrics in The Message, totally differently. This came out one day. I have all of the BI lyrics and most of our like solo titles and a lot of like layout ideas are in this notebook. This ambient artist named Jeffrey Chandler, who made an album called Starscapes in 1980, which is inadvertently the Blood Incantation Star Spawn LP layout is a direct homage to this Jeffrey Chandler Starscapes. And so Jeffrey Chandler was a visual artist making spacescapes and airbrushing stuff back in the 70s and 80s and even the 90s. And I even did a solo record with some of his art. And this guy, he made these little notebooks that have like new age aphorisms on one page and then like, some blank stuff and then like an Egyptian proverb and then, all the stuff. So all of the lyrics are in this. And one day I was just doing something else and, at the house and I was like, ooh, I need a pen. And so I just wrote, and it ended up being like 5 or 6 pages of these lyrics that ended up becoming The Message. And it was actually way too much information. And it kind of just came out, one stream of consciousness. Like, that's why it's called The Message, Also important to specify, not my message, not even just the message. I'm not even a messenger. It's the message. It stands on its own. It's just right here. And so in the studio, Arthur and I were there for 5 days doing just the vocals. And, since the Stargate, all the lyrics were written specifically for each part. All we did for those was work on enunciation and, the diction of each stuff. Because most of my vocals are really boring. They're just like long, drawn out vocals. I don't really necessarily like the rapid fire vocal part. But in The Message, Arthur and I went through these like 5 or 6 pages of kind of this new age metaphysical stream of consciousness stuff, and then we fit them. Like, we knew we wanted the song to start with, what does it mean to be human? This was really important. And the end of the song had to be like, could this all be for nothing, or is your life part of something? So all this other stuff, like, we took page 5 and made it page 2, and we put page 2 and made it page 4. We chopped things up, we reintegrated stuff. Certain parts we were like, this should be clean vocals because its message, its essence is really clear, and it should be clear in this, you should be able to read it and hear it very naturally because of what it's trying to say. So then it kind of reconstituted this flowing abstract stream of consciousness message into a very clear philosophical, like metaphysical message. And when we were looking at this in the studio, and also the other guys, they were kind of, this is when, in the documentary you don't see too much of this, but this is when they're like really enjoying Berlin. They're coming by the studio maybe at the nighttime and seeing what we did during the day. But for the most of these 5 days, they're just, we're left to our own devices. So I remember the first time they came into the studio, and there's all these clean vocal parts, which we had discussed but never practiced. Like, there was this also maybe fun anecdote. There was no Absolute Elsewhere rehearsals with vocals for years. And we made a full-length, multi-tracked pre-production demo tape, which is what we gave to Nicholas Malmquist when Halos played in Denver in early 23, to say, this is what we're going to do. There's like mini Moog solos on it. There's all these extra sounds, but there was no vocals. And so he also didn't know. And then the other guys were like, what's this guy going to do? He wants to put clean vocals on here.
My exact memory is that Paul had us come in and was like, guys, okay, it's going to be really crazy, but like, I don't know. If you don't like it, you can tell me, And we listened to it. No, of course, it's great. Yeah, of course.
It seems very natural, like, especially now. And I think this type of, like, I can't just sit down and like write this channel type of lyrical thing, but I think it actually reconstituted my brain into this type of, I think, also this, one of my biggest lyrical inspirations is this record, Elva Nefris by Lycathia of Flame from Czech in 2000. This is a really beautiful album. It's basically like Cryptopsy and Enya combined. Really beautiful, wholesome lyrics about forgiveness, growing old, understanding. It's really crazy, yeah. And this album's lyrics are just unbelievably positive. And it was, I don't know any other record that has lyrics like this. I mean, Chuck Schuldiner, Later Death, and also later, like, Pleiades Dust and Gorguts Obscura, these types of like kind of mystical, metaphysical, positive stuff, but they're not like openly like
New Age
lyrics, But this Lycathia Flame album absolutely is. And I was like, why can't it be positive? Why can't it be like, it's right here, all this portals and stargates and pyramids and obelisks, ancient mystical energy. The essence of all these cultures are trying to tell you is this new age metaphysical esoteric message of positivity and hope. And I think that's actually, to be reductive, Absolute Elsewhere is lyrically and musically about the hope. And I think that that's something that translates pretty well, honestly, in the final products, is you can feel this uplifting hopefulness. And even to us as just guys in this band, it inspired us almost immediately to start trying new musical ideas, which normally when we finish the studio, it takes us like 2 years before we even try to write a new riff. And before Absolute Elsewhere even came out, we already were working on new ideas because it was so hopeful and motivating. We were like, yeah, we can make even more crazy music.
Thank you very much. Let's move to the question and answers because there's an eager audience out there. I'll just go through these in the order of first come, first served. As there are so many, please try to keep your replies short.
You got it.
So many of your fans would get their questions answered. The first one, how has Finnish death metal influenced your music?
I mean, I think for both of us, it's like slightly different also because Spectral Voice has its own special influences. But Finnish metal in general has been a huge inspiration to me since I was a kid. And actually, it's maybe not cool, but like I was a huge fan of Winter Sun and Children of Bodom when I was a kid. So those were like huge. But then also finding Demolich and, bands like this, all other Finnish black metal. I mean, Moon Sorrow was a huge one as well.
Berghafen.
Berghathen's a huge one. I mean, God, there's so many. I mean, you have the most metal bands per capita. So,
Yeah.
I mean, like, I could name like 200 bands right now. But
And they're all pretty good.
they're all really good. I mean, you can, going from doom metal to funeral doom.
I think the Finnish
I don't know.
vibe, at least as an American, the Finnish bands all had a certain somberness in them, whereas like the Swedish bands, you know, obviously is really great bands. Like my favorite Swedish death metal specific bands are bands like Nihilist or Grotesque or Crematory, but also Crypt of Kerberos and Eternal Darkness, which I guess are in some like ethnically predominantly Finnish area of Sweden, and so like Eternal Darkness sounds more Finnish than they do Swedish, if that makes sense, to an American ear. And this dark somberness, you know, like there's this kind of lumbering heaviness inside of it, whereas the Swedish had a lot more energy and a different type of, you know, party atmosphere, a lot more D beats, you know, this anti-climax riffs or whatever. But the Finnish stuff is profoundly darker.
I think it's more weird.
Yeah, definitely more weird. I mean, like bands like Unholy and Demolish is super.
So-
this is super big for us.
Have you ever been abducted? Is there anything you'd like to disclose in the age of disclosure we're living in?
You told me to keep my answers short, man.
All right, we'll move to the next one. Any bands you'd like to collab with?
Oh, so many.
I mean, we just played a show with Cynic that, I mean, we want to collaborate with Paul Masvidal.
Yeah, he was
that's
supposed to
something
do
that
a
we wanna
solo
do.
on Absolute Elsewhere, but his studio had like melted. His like mainframe or something was hacked. I don't know.
But I mean, Brian Eno, Steve Roach. We probably are going to do anyways with Steve Roach, and
Yeah,
then
I mean, Brian Eno is probably like
would be
the
the top
top.
one.
Yeah, if Brian Eno produced a Blood Incantation album, this would be the ultimate record.
Among Klaus Schulze and Tangerine Dream, what are your biggest ambient influences?
Out of these two icons of ambient with 100 albums each,
That is the question.
which are the two we like the most?
or are there what? Oh.
Maybe out of those two.
Both of these are very important bands. I mean, my favorite Klaus Schulze is obviously the 70s, the classic stuff, you know, basically from Earlicht up through Mirage. But he also has, like, his Deus Arrakis is one of his best records. This first one that came out after he died. And also Realm, one of the more current Tangerine Dream albums, is also very good. But for me, like, 71 to 78 or 79, I mean, the 70s stuff is so good.
For me, Tangerine Dream was my biggest influence getting into that stuff 15, 20 years ago when I heard Phaedra. And actually, since we're talking about psychedelic music, there was a time when I was allegedly on certain substances and was listening to Phaedra, looking at the album art, and had like a very profound experience with that album.
Phaedra was actually also my first Tangerine Dream, which I got in 2002 at a Goodwill for like $2.75, and I definitely listened to that on mushrooms and was like, "What type of music is this?"
So there's a question about favorite Finnish artist. Maybe we covered that already. Favorite
There's a lot.
album to play live?
Absolute
I mean,
Elsewhere,
Absolute
yeah.
Elsewhere is. I mean, we have actually played all of our albums live in full at some point. Time Wave Zero is
Time Wave
also
Zero,
a
number
very
two, probably. Those are probably the two
The
most
two.
Blood Incantation albums. If you were to,
yeah.
you know, each one. I mean, I think each of these is a good record in its own right, and they each have their own faults dependent on where we were in that process at the time. But if you were to just, you know, show an alien Blood Incantation, I would say if you show them Time Wave or Absolute Elsewhere, this is the point.
Any plans to do another fully ambient album? Time Wave Zero is my most listened to album ever. Thanks a lot, guys. Well, you just did.
We
didn't
just
Yeah,
released
All
the
Gates
second one.
Open
All
just
Gates
came
Open
out.
just came out, yeah, but it's different from Time Wave. Time Wave is like dark, like a planetarium soundtrack floating through deep space. All Gates Open is like floating on mushrooms in a field in a Finnish sunset when it's 3 in the morning, but it looks like 7 p.m.
That's a good one. What was the inspiration to write two 20-plus minute songs for one album?
I mean, we're just huge fans of prog albums. I mean, yes, you know, you just think of any of the huge
Pink Floyd.
Pink Floyd. I mean, side long tracks were like a
Rush,
very
you know.
actually, again, Moon Sorrow was actually a very big inspiration to me. The V have a TT or whatever, that album. It's two songs. Yeah.
Sometimes you need only 3 minutes to make the narrative like tell the story, but sometimes 20 minutes, like a side-long track, it's like a micro movie. You drop the needle and you go a whole side in. That's how we listen to music.
So let me skip questions that you have already answered. Have you had time for a record hall in Finland, and are you releasing a YouTube video of that? This is very important.
No, but we just were at Nostalgia Palace in Stockholm, which was very detrimental to all
It's
of
a
our
dangerous place for
bank
Blood
accounts.
Incantation.
Yeah.
It's a record store that specializes in krautrock, prog, and metal and punk, and it's triangulated by 3 Max burgers. Some people would say that constitutes entrapment. This is like if you want to get Blood Incantation into your van, you just do that.
Do you have a theme or a concept you'd like to explore next?
Yeah, we can't tell it though. You know what I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about.
Come on, spill the beans.
No, we can't. It's
among
really, but
friends
it's really
here.
good. It's really good actually. It's a true concept album.
Well, that sounds very good. We have maybe time for 1 or 2 more. Your compositions are melodically unconventional but still make a lot of sense. Do you approach composing through theory or just go with what sounds good?
Just what's the vibes?
I have a very rudimentary knowledge of music theory, and we kind of mash our very stupid brains all together at the same time, and somehow it comes out. I don't know.
I don't even know the names of the strings.
Well, the main point is what you do with them. In Hidden History, there was one 20-minute song. In Absolute Elsewhere, there was 2. Is the end goal to make one 40-plus minute song like Sleep?
You might have figured it out.
You did. It's called Blood Incantation, the song from the album Blood Incantation by the band Blood Incantation live on Broadway. It's like an hour long.
Excellent. I think we are approaching the end of this session now. So thank you very much. You've been dubbed the pioneers of the most extreme music. No, the extreme frontier of music, which is combining everything, like you said. And the genre will be called Slambient.
Slambient. Well,
Yeah.
they already did it. Colin Marston already did this. He did it
It's true.
first.
So we're waiting for that. So thank you very much, gentlemen. It's been an absolute pleasure, and we're all looking forward for your show tonight. Thank you
Thanks
very much.
so much.
Thank you.